Hi, this is John Hand, and this Cinema Spotlight is dedicated to a very controversial film from 1980, William Friedkin's Cruising.
How would you like to disappear?
Disappear?
Go undercover.
You know this man?
Who's here? I'm here. You're here.
These victims are all the same physical type.
What about him, Skip?
Late 20s, 140, 150 pounds. Dark hair, dark eyes.
Have you ever seen him before?
I want to send you out there to see if you can attract this guy.
How, where?
A New York City detective in search of a killer is about to disappear into the night.
Is it dangerous?
I can't talk about it.
How do you know you're going to end up the same person when it's over?
An odyssey to the edge of city life.
Bartenders are starting to give me some information. There's this name keeps popping up all the time. There he is. The one with the hat.
Is that the one that followed you?
Yeah.
Why didn't you go with him?
I don't know. I think you should check him.
If you want to play, I'll play with you.
He's the wrong guy.
Prints don't match.
What he sees,
Who's here?
what he feels,
I don't think I can do the job, Captain. I don't think I can handle it.
I'm here.
There's just stuff going down. I don't think I can deal with it.
Yes! Yes!
You're here.
what he experiences,
Yes!
what he discovers will change his life forever. Al Pacino.
Who's here? I'm here. You're here.
Cruising.
The story of Cruising takes place in the late 70s, early 80s in New York, in the summer, in the gay leather bar scene of the bowels of New York. Clubs like the Ramrod and the Hellfire Club and the Cockpit. We're introduced to all of these very subterranean layers at the beginning of this film. It's the gay leather scene of the late 70s and early 80s where all of these people dressed up like something out of the Gimp in Pulp Fiction amble around very slowly and very determinately and in these clubs there's all this crazy punk music that's blasting and blaring as people are doing poppers, and there's all this kind of sweaty things going on in the darkness in these awful clubs where all these men are quote unquote cruising, which is in this film walking very slowly and trying to find a date for the night basically. And very quickly in Cruising, we're introduced to the idea that there is a killer. There is a serial killer who is stalking its prey in these clubs and is killing these gay men in this leather bar scene. The first scene of the film, we see this happen. We see this killer who is unnamed. We view him from really behind. We have a few glimpses of his face, but we see as he's at a bar with another young man who is dressed in this really odd zip-up flight suit thing, and they have this weird discussion about smoking because the killer is smoking, and he says, try some other type of stimulation, like a feather over the nape of your neck. Just this really inane conversation, and they very quickly, go back to this really rundown flea-bit hotel where they have a liaison for the night. They have sex, and then the guy in the flight suit that the killer picks up ends up being hogtied on a bed, face down, and the killer is like, you made me do this, and he stabs him in the back multiple times. A very, very, very creepy scene. And we're also introduced within these first couple scenes to the idea that that this killer, as well as picking up gay men and killing them, he's also cutting up their bodies and leaving little remnants of them in the Hudson River. There's a boat, and a boat captain, is going on in the boat, and he finds that there are these body parts that are just floating up in the river, and we see a policeman, and we see that he has this whole collection of body parts that they don't even, some of them don't even have a person associated with them. They're just in a tray in the morgue. They're just shoved into this lonely little tray in the morgue. They don't even know who these people are. So the police are under a lot of pressure to solve these crimes, to solve these murders, to find the gay serial killer. In particular, Captain Edelstein, played by Paul Sorvino, feels a lot of this pressure. And what he does is he finds a young rookie, young guy on the force, Steve Burns, played by Al Pacino. And the thing is that Al Pacino, Steve Burns' character, has this permed hair, he has his dark hair, and he resembles one of the killer's victims, rather. So Edelstein in this very stark scene asked Al Pacino if he's ever had his cock sucked, if he's ever had gay sex, if he's ever done this or done that, and Al Pacino is just like stunned. He's like, "Oh no!" It's a very odd scene because it's just such a shocking scene to see these Paul Sorvino and Al Pacino talking in such a frank manner. But Al Pacino agrees to it because Paul Sorvino, Edelstein's like, if you do this, you're going to make detective. You're going to get your badge. You're going to get your golden shield. It's going to be, you're going to be in with us if you go and go undercover into this gay leather scene and try to find this killer for us. So Burns, Al Pacino, who we're led to believe is a rather normal guy. He has this nice girlfriend played by Karen Allen who he loves, and she loves him, and it's a big kind of love relationship. He goes undercover in the gay leather scene. They set him up in an apartment next to a really nice gay playwright, wannabe playwright, played by Darren Scardino. Ted Bailey is his character's name. And, Ted, and there's all this relationship with Ted and getting to know him. And, very slowly, Al Pacino is going to the gay leather bars, learning the whole scene, learning the people, and getting into the weird, rituals of this whole subculture, this whole gay leather subculture, which is full of pain and punishment and poppers and dancing. And while this is going on, the killing is still continuing, and in very odd ways. The first murder, as I said, starts with a pickup at one of these bars. The second murder is in the brambles, in the woods, where actually the first killer, the first person we see who is obviously the initial killer, is trolling for somebody, and he gets murdered in the second scene. So it's just really kind of weird. And then there's this clothing designer who is, by day he's designing all these fancy clothes, and he's on He's in one of these big stores, and he's like, "Oh, I'm going to the island for the weekend. Don't disturb me." But where he's going at night. He's prowling in his convertible. He's cruising in his convertible, and he finds himself at one of these gay X-rated arcades, I guess, where people would go in and for 25 cents or 50 cents, they'd go into this darkened room and watch some X-rated porno loops. And while this was happening, things would happen inside this darkened room. And instead, what happens to him is he gets knifed for his troubles as he attempts to go down on the serial killer. And the serial killer then puts these bloodied. We see him putting these bloodied coins into the X-rated arcade loop inside, so he can keep the arcade loop going, so he can leave. But they actually find a fingerprint on these bloodied coins. So Al Pacino is still kind of learning the ropes. He's getting to know the people. He's getting to know the places. There's this very stark scene where he actually goes into the store and he sees all these handkerchiefs. And he's like, "What are all these handkerchiefs for?" And the guy behind the counter, the store clerk, played by Powers Booth in a little cameo, describes to Steve Burns, what all these handkerchiefs were for. And actually based on something that was really going on there. In the New York gay scene of the late 70s and early 80s, there was this handkerchief code where you would wear a handkerchief in your back left pocket or back right pocket, and you were either a dominant or a submissive of a particular type of sex act. And there were like dozens and dozens of different shades and colors of these handkerchiefs. And Al Pacino in this very shocking scene is told by Powers Booth what primarily some of these handkerchiefs mean.
Excuse me. Can I ask you about these?
What about them?
What are they for?
A light blue hank in your left back pocket means you want a blowjob. Right pocket means you give one. The green one left side says you're a hustler, right side you're a buyer. The yellow one left side means you give golden shower, right side you receive. The red one means see anything you want.
I'm gonna go home and think about it.
I'm sure you'll make the right choice.
Running throughout this, there's this whole subplot of these two policemen who are trolling around the gay leather area, this meatpacking district area, and we see them at the beginning of the film, and they're just kind of like, "Oh, look at these guys." Or they see these guys, ambling around the street. You used to be able to play stickball in these streets. Now look at these guys. Two policemen, kind of really slimy looking bad cops, wonderfully played by excellent character actors Joe Spinell and Mike Starr. Joe Spinell, of course, of Maniac, and Mike Starr of so many films like Ed Wood. Take your pick. So these guys go around and they're harassing the young gay people there, young gay guys, and pulling them into their cop cars and having them perform sex acts and just doing all kinds of weird things. And they're also red herrings, of course, because this film is, of course, supposed to be a murder mystery. So again, they provide another little red herring boost. Okay, so the story goes on, and Al Pacino finds this one gay guy who he thinks could be the killer, possibly. He has this guy with this really crazy, erratic personality, and we find out that this guy works at a steak restaurant where he has access to these steak knives, which could be the killer's weapon, and they set up a sting at another flea bit hotel where, in an early role, Ed O'Neill and Sonny Grosso, who was a technical advisor in this film, and of course, obviously from the French Connection, perform a sting, and they rush in and Al Pacino's like hogtied on the bed. He's naked, and but it turns out the guy isn't the killer, and this really shakes up Al Pacino that he actually fingered a guy who was just completely just a scared gay guy, not the killer at all. And Edelstein's kind of like, hey, we're deep into this. My superiors they got my ass. We got to find this killer. And so by a process of deduction, a very convenient process of deduction, Al Pacino finds this musical student who was, because one of the murder victims was a professor. And he finds this music student who very well could be the killer. And the finale of the film takes place where it becomes this, the end of the film becomes this kind of cat and mouse chase between Steve Burns, Al Pacino, and this music student played by Richard Cox, a great actor from The Vindicator, actually, and other great films. Great kind of villainous kind of personality that Richard Cox has. And Al Pacino breaks into his apartment. He finds letters that he's written to his father, like dozens and dozens and dozens of letters that he's written to his father. And there begins to develop a motive of why this guy would kill gay men, because we actually see Richard Cox in this very strange scene talk to his father, and his father is like, you know what you have to do, and it's very odd, strange dialogue. So the end of the film takes place at night as Al Pacino lures Richard Cox to this park, and they have this showdown where Al Pacino goes, I want to, does all this gay slang. By this point, he's all down and hips are lips and all of this crazy slang, and he knows the lingo. He's talking shop, and they eventually there's this confrontation. They pin the murders on him. They pin the murders on this Richard Cox character, but the film ends in this very strange, vague way with Al Pacino, after all this stuff has gone down, kind of decompressing at his house, at his apartment, rather, with Karen Allen. Karen Allen starts trying on his leather gear, his hat, and his glasses, just for the fun of it, because he just leaves it, because he goes into the next room and kind of plop down. He's just dog tired. And then we see that night that Ted Bailey, his neighbor, was violently murdered. And who do we have covering the Ted Bailey murder scene but Joe Spinell, one of the corrupt cops? So, Cruising, a very unusual film, a very effective film. The film has a really long history. It has a very convoluted production history, and it's a very controversial film. The film began with a book that was written by Gerald Walker. Gerald Walker was a New York Times editor, and as far as I know, he only wrote this one book, Cruising. And it's basically what the film's about. It's about a gay serial killer in this leather bar scene, and there's an undercover cop who is, infiltrating that. And so he based Cruising actually on a series of real unsolved murders which took place in New York. Actually, the murders were, I believe, similar to this, to what happens in the film, where these murder victims were actually cut up into pieces, and they found pieces of them in the river. So this book was in some ways a hot property, and it was a well-known property. And a lot of directors tried to attach themselves to it. At one point, Brian De Palma wanted to do this film, wanted to direct it. At one point, in the late 70s, Steven Spielberg wanted to do this film. I think this was going to be his project after 1941 or Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It was going to be this film, which is really a shocker. To have seen this material done by Steven Spielberg would have been really, really different. But eventually, William Friedkin directed the film. I think he was originally approached by his French Connection producer, Phil D'Antoni, about directing this film earlier, like in the earlier 70s, and he declined to do it. And then I think a couple things happened, because first of all, he learned of the story of Randy Jurgensen, who was an actual policeman. He's actually in Cruising. He plays one of the characters. He's one of the mainstays in some early films by Bill Lustig. He's at the end of Maniac. He's in Vigilante. He was, a Golden Shield police advisor at that point. Randy Jurgensen himself actually went undercover in the gay leather scene to try to find these two cops, which they called Salt and Pepper, because there was one black cop and one white cop. They were so-called cops because they were actually impersonating policemen. And what they would do is they would go and they would find these gay guys who were doing their thing in alleys and everything, and they'd shake them down for money. And the police department was very concerned about these guys who were impersonating policemen, or who were real policemen or whatever. So they sent Randy Jurgensen undercover, and he had to dress like this in his gay leather attire and do this. And William Friedkin heard the story, and then he heard the story of Paul Bateson, who was in The Exorcist. And Paul Bateson is in you see him in The Exorcist. He's the radiology assistant who, I believe he has the mustache, and he helps. At one point, you see Reagan get some radiological exam, and Paul Bateson is actually in the film. And he was an actual radiology assistant because Friedkin used real people in that film, and he was actually convicted of a murder of a gay man, apparently his lover, and I don't think he directly confessed, but I think he said he dropped a lot of hints that he was actually also the killer, the serial killer of these, which was part of these unsolved gay murders, which the book Cruising was based on. And William Friedkin actually interviewed Paul Bateson when he was in prison for this one murder, which he was convicted of. And he kept dropping a lot of hints that he was actually involved in these other unsolved gay crimes. So Friedkin kind of put this film together out of three sources. He put it together out of the Gerald Walker Cruising book. He put it together based on the real-life experiences of Randy Jurgensen going undercover to find these policemen, and also of Paul Bateson, the killer, the real-life killer, who could have had something to do with these unsolved gay murders, which the book is actually based on. So the film began production in 1979 in New York, on location, just the only way William Friedkin would have it. And it was a very troubled production because early on this was the era of gay liberation. There were a lot of angry voices, a lot of vocal gay advocates, and early on, a lot of people were very skeptical of this Cruising film because they'd read the book, and which was published years before, and you see there's an interview with Gerald Walker, which you can find online, where people were just very against this book. They found the book, from what I've read, from what I've looked through. I haven't read the whole thing, but it's full of all these racial stereotypes. It's very cliched, and it could be seen as it could cast a negative light toward the gay community, in the sense that in the way that these men are described in this film, the way the whole gay leather scene is described in this film, which is very primal and in some cases ugly. So gay advocates actually got an early draft of the script. They read it, and from the beginning there were protests. There were people who were organized to disrupt the cruising shoot. Any kind of on-location shoot, exterior shoot, there would be like dozens and dozens and dozens, hundreds really, not dozens, hundreds of protesters who they had to cordon off, and they would throw bottles and stuff at the actors, and it was just a zoo, it was a circus, and just completely crazy. Now, to research the film, this is funny. William Friedkin actually went into these gay leather bars. In particular, he went into the Hellfire Club, which was the main location for this film. Most of the gay leather scenes were shot in the Hellfire Club, which is a cool club. There were scenes from Basket Case that were shot in that club. Also, parts of Madonna's Sex Book were apparently photographed there. But William Friedkin actually went into that club, and he dressed down and did a lot of research there into what was going on in that scene. And a lot of the extras that he used in the club were just the real people who went to that club, and he shot a lot of really crazy footage of people, and this club is when you see the film, you realize it's just a really crazy place. It's full of, there's this one thing on the wall which is like an American flag, but it's made of these lights that are flashing on and off, and there's these swings and people who are oiling up and fisting each other, and William Friedkin always says that he shot this fisting scene where you could see this guy's fist inside this coming through, and you could see it in his stomach, and and it was just all this kind of crazy footage, which caused all kinds of censorship issues, where the film was originally passed with an X rating, and it took him all kinds of magical editing techniques to somehow get an R rating for this film. And to appease the protesters, he actually added a line at the beginning of this film, a disclaimer at the beginning of this film, which reads as such: "This film is not intended as an indictment of the homosexual world. It is set in one small segment of that world, which is not meant to be representative of the whole." So there you go. William Friedkin's let off the hook because it's just one small segment. So my thoughts on the film. Well, the film is supposed to be a murder mystery, where it's this straightforward thing. The tagline is often in the posters, Al Pacino is cruising for a killer. And it's supposed to be about this killer in this gay leather scene, and Al Pacino's hunting after him. But the film, to me, feels more like a horror film. It feels to me more less in league with like Friedkin's The French Connection, or Jade, or Live and Die in L.A., his crime movies, and it feels to me more in league with like The Exorcist. To me, it feels like this weird kinship with The Exorcist. In fact, one of the posters for Cruising, or rather the cover art of the album Cruising, is this picture of this night shot, this black and white night shot of this guy in the park. This gay leather guy in the park. It could be one of the killers. It could be Al Pacino, and he's like standing straight up and silhouetted, and it looks like a shot from Max von Sydow in the poster of The Exorcist. In fact, there's this, and the title of the film, Cruising, is in diagonal over the top of this album art poster in red, and it's just like, whoa. Throughout this film, the killer seems kind of like it feels like he could almost be possessed. He's well, first of all, a weird thing in the film is that oftentimes there are different. There's obviously more than one killer in the film, but they all seem to have the same voice. They're all dubbed, but the same voice, just like it's like almost like they're demonically possessed. I mean, there are no overt, fantastical paranormal elements in this film, but you just get this uncomfortable vibe that something. That there's this demonic force that's pushing these killers forward. This group of killers, because it's not just one. Because as I was saying earlier, this initial killer of the initial murder is himself killed in the brambles. So, but all these killers share the same voice because they're all dubbed. They're dubbed. They have the same voice. And so it becomes this very strange experience where the audience is just very confused because, okay, this one guy killed them, they have the same voice. And this confusion is never really resolved at the end of the film. Almost like, as I said earlier, this is some kind of possession which follows people, which infects people. And at the end scene, we're almost led to believe that maybe Steve Burns may be infected by this evil, that maybe he will continue on. Because at the end scene we see, Karen Allen, and we hear the chains, the sound, the signature sounds of the killer, echo into the night as we see another scene of a guy walking into one of these gay leather bars. So it's kind of unresolved. Also, the entire film is dubbed because the exteriors with the protesters, they couldn't do any live production dialogue. They had to dub all of that stuff. But also at that point, William Friedkin was, he was spending literally shooting days, 8 or 9 hours, and then over days and days and days. He would spend 20 or 30 hours filming insert shots of bacon, on a stove or something, and so he was a perfectionist. So he would. When you're a perfectionist, you want to go in and redub all your dialogue, get all your actors back in and re-record the dialogue so that everything just sounds exactly the way you want it. And this film has a really incredible sound mix. The same sound team who worked on Sorcerer and worked on The Exorcist worked on this film, and you hear the chains, the echoey subterranean lair of these gay bars. You hear the night. You hear all of this stuff. You hear the incredible soundtrack of this film, which is very important, full of all kinds of punk music. The Germs, it's their only soundtrack album they ever did. John Hyatt, Flyboy, and Willie DeVille, who is probably the most recognizable part of the soundtrack, who does these tracks. It's so easy. And Pulling My String, I believe. And It's So Easy is a signature track. It actually found itself into Quentin Tarantino's Death Proof. And it is just this evil, strange sounding track, removed from the context of being a punk track or being a song. It seems to kind of embody the soul of this killer, that it's just so easy to murder, to kill, or to engage in whatever weird, violent fantasies he's engaging in. So, I mean, this soundtrack again pushes the film forward as this, strange, and apart from all these music tracks from the Germs and Willie DeVille and all these people, there's also a very strange score by Jack Nitzsche, the famed composer who worked on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, famed musician, also did the soundtrack for The Exorcist, did some of the tracks for The Exorcist. And he has this very screechy, strange score full of all kinds of weird percussion and all kinds of strange stuff, and it creeps up on you and in this film in very weird places. So it's the actors in this film who also really make the film. We have as our lead character Al Pacino, who at this point it seems kind of lost in this film. He doesn't really seem the driving element. He's a character that early on we realize something's going on in the back of his mind, that he's really maybe he's getting turned on by this experience of being in the gay leather scene. We're not sure. I mean, this whole experience is really affecting his core, and he's really being shaken by what he's seeing in these clubs, and if he's getting into it or not. There's this very weird scene where he's been in these clubs for a while, and he spends the night with his girlfriend. He runs away, but she is very seductive and loving, and we see her kind of do the movie thing where she kind of they're in bed together, and she kind of slithers out of frame toward the bottom of his body, and it's this kind of really loving scene. But we hear, as I said, the great soundtrack. We hear in Steve Burns' mind, we hear the clubs and the whooping and the hooping and the hollering, and we realize that as Karen's doing whatever she's doing to Steve Burns, he's imagining what these guys could be doing to him or something. And so the subtext of this is just really crazy. As I said earlier, Mike Starr and Joe Spinell are just crazy. Apparently, in the long version of this film, because apparently this film was like 140 minutes and it was really sliced apart, cut apart, they have all these weird scenes where they're doing all this kind of weird sex stuff. These two corrupt cops. So they're just great, and Joe Spinell always keeps popping up in the film because he's supposed to be a red herring. He actually cruises, walks past seductively. He walks past Al Pacino when he's in the brambles. So this guy Joe Spinell, and he's also in the clubs as well. We see him like as a greaser, and so it's kind of like, okay, is he the killer? Is he not? So that's really cool. Don Scardino, who was a famous red-haired actor, Ginger, he was in Squirm. He did a lot of theater. He eventually became a theater director, television director, but then he became a theater director. He directed the premiere performance of A Few Good Men for Aaron Sorkin. He's great in this film as Ted Bailey, as Steve Burns' roommate, who kind of represents the mainstream of gay culture. And, he has this relationship, this tumultuous relationship. Steve Bailey has this relationship with an early performance by James Remar as his roommate, who's supposed to be this ballerina, this dancer who's always leaving him, and so Steve and Ted Bailey are always down at the local ice cream shop, kind of, at the local diner, kind of like hashing out like what's going on, and Steve's telling, Ted Bailey's telling Steve about, you ever go to the bathhouses, and you check in and blow 20 guys in an hour, and Steve's like, could you do that? And he's like, I don't know. I just, sometimes I feel like it, I feel that the pressure could be going, and it's like, ugh, especially when you realize, what came out of those bathhouses in that era, which there really isn't the specter of AIDS or whatever at this point, but you kind of see it around the corner, and maybe some people could see the killer as the specter of HIV kind of coming up and assaulting these people who are this violent, ragged subculture, ragged edge of the gay culture, this gay leather subculture, sub-scene, whatever, because we're at the beginning we're it's made very clear that this is not this is not regular society, this is a crazy society, so we can just show it any way we want. Paul Sorvino is great. Paul Sorvino, like, This film was like shot in 79, released in 80. Like Goodfellas is like in friggin' 88, 89, 90. He didn't age in 10 years. He looks like Paul Sorvino, Karen Allen is in the film, a few scenes. She's some nice eye candy. Overall, really great performances, even by the bit players, the authentic people who frequent these clubs, who are captured forever on film. They're all great, and they're doing their thing in front of the cameras. Mustaches and leather chaps and all. So that's a little shocking, a little disturbing. Now, as I said a couple times here, the film was very controversial with gay rights groups as well as with the MPAA as far as ratings. And William Friedkin had to cut this film down. His producer, Jerry Weintraub, was kind of full behind him in this controversial film, but he eventually really had to slice this film up. And the cut which initially survived for the first 20 years of Cruising's life was 20 years or so was the cut version, the cut theatrical version. And then the rumblings began in 1999 and 2000 during the re-release of The Exorcist. Not the the version you've never seen. Well, actually, they did in the UK. They did a re-release of the original Exorcist, the original version of The Exorcist, the original cut. And during that time period, you see in Sight and Sound and other magazines, a lot of people began asking William Friedkin, "Well, what about Cruising? What about?" And William Friedkin was like, "Well, we've got all this extra footage. I had to cut out a lot of the stuff in Cruising. I'd love to do a director's cut." And so the wheels began to move, and it took a few years, but then in 2007, it premiered at Cannes, a supposed Cruising director's cut, where Friedkin had gone back, had added footage, had changed a lot of things. Now, a lot of the most controversial footage was the footage they shot in the Hellfire Club, in the Gay Leather Club. And with these scenes of, as I said, semi-real sex, the film, there's some really controversial stuff going on in it, because each of these murders in the film is punctuated by, you see the killer, stab, and there's, the shots of him stabbing, but then it's intercut like subliminal edits, like what he was trying to do with The Exorcist, with these, it's actually... And in the final version, in the actual finished theatrical cut, there are actually frames of a gay porno, of actual penetration. And if you still frame these scenes as you see these shots of these knives go into people, you'll actually see something else go into some other person in real life, for real. And so the purpose of these cuts is kind of dubious. It's we're not sure of what specific reason, but it is very intense and weird. And these frames survived the cuts because as I said, they're subliminal. You can't even understand what's happening. You can't see it unless you do a frame by frame. But then once you do a frame by frame, you can. They're so-called subliminal, but they're clearly visible. So they're just kind of masked by the way they're cut in the film. But once you see them, you can clearly see them. They're next viewing of the film. So, I mean, besides that really weird, crazy, explicit element, Friedkin cut out a lot of stuff, and a lot of that footage was lost. So with his director's cut, he reinstated what footage he could find of that stuff, and he made a lot of changes as far as, and controversial changes as far as the color grading of the film. And he also removed the initial disclaimer in the film that this is a subset of the gay cult. He removed that, and the film begins with this. It originally began with no titles. And actually for a 1979, 1980 film, this is kind of a brave film to begin with no titles. It's like Apocalypse Now or something. It begins with a big cruising title which scrolls across horizontally on the screen now in the director's cut. And he changed the color grading of the film, which is to say that now that most of the scenes in the film are the same. The daytime scenes are the same, but these scenes in the gay leather bar at night have this blue cast to them now. They're all this kind of blue color cast in order to very clearly, in order to kind of intensify the feeling that this is kind of this subterranean, almost underwater experience with these people and these characters, where instead of flesh tones, they're just all this blue. They're all blue. It's all this blue. It's very heavily blue, is what I'm trying to say. And then there comes a pivotal moment in these club scenes where, you know, Al Pacino's been kind of hanging back. He's been kind of just, you know, talking to the bartender, you know, drinking some beers, you know, he's hanging out, but sometimes he makes some social faux pas, like he puts the handkerchief in the wrong pocket, and he's like, "Why are you wearing that?" And some gay guy comes over and thinks he's going to get a free ride. It's like, "Why you watching? Why you got that handkerchief, man?" And so he makes some gay social faux pas. But overall, he's scoring some points, he's doing some stuff. But then there becomes a break point where there becomes this famous song by Willie DeVille, "Heat of the Moment," which comes on and it starts blaring in the jukebox, and one of the gay guys is like, "Hey, love, are you with someone?" He's like, "Yeah, well, aren't we all?" And they take him out into and he gets lured out into the middle of the dance floor, and he starts sucking on this rag that has, you know, whatever chemical on it, and starts doing this dance. And he starts dancing like this robot. It's like Al Pacino doing this robot dance, and it's heat of the moment, and all these sweaty gay guys are dancing around, and it's like it's like this weird primal jungle rhythm where you feel the Al Pacino character begin to become in tune with what's going on in this club, and the music begins to blare, and it's more intensity, and it just becomes this great moment, you know, where it's a pivotal moment where, as I said, he kind of goes from spectator to participant. And in the director's cut version of this scene, I think it can even kind of intensifies it. It's very controversial because some people don't like the changes he's made. First of all, these Hellfire Club scenes have all been this blue, intense color. But then as Al Pacino starts sucking on this rag, doing the chemicals, there begins to be pops of color. We see the color that's been subdued pop and almost like come to life, almost to like signal that this is a pivotal change, that like these skin colors of all these sweaty gay guys on the dance floor begin to pop, and they begin to pop in the flesh, and just pops, almost subliminal pops. You know, you wouldn't even realize you're seeing these pops maybe until you watch it a couple times. And then as Al Pacino's dancing, there's this weird video effect that's been applied to his dancing, where almost as if he's becoming under the influence of this drug, and you see these trails, and he's doing all, and his body becomes all blurry, and he's doing all these motion trails you begin to see. And a lot of people didn't like this change. They found it to be to look rather ridiculous. But from one perspective, yes, it does look rather ridiculous, and it's changed. From another perspective, in the original film, Al Pacino's dancing really looked ridiculous. I mean, he's just doing all this incredibly weird dancing, and it looks ridiculous. And from one perspective, the video effect makes it look a little less ridiculous because you don't see it as much. It's a little more subdued. So I think in that sense it works. Another change is and also Friedkin does all these little tiny changes throughout the film. You know, that the soundtrack is being remixed to multi-channel to 5.1, and it sounds just fantastic. There's another scene where he like adds this like iris, like it looks like in this 1920s film. I noticed one critic of this director's cut. It looks like some kind of 1920s film where it just like this iris focuses in on Steve Burns at one point toward the end of the film, and it just looks like it does look ridiculous. But besides that one change, which I dislike, the director's cut is overall a really great, valid cut of the film. It's the only cut that's available on DVD, and it definitely is the one probably to watch at this point. If you're interested, you can find the original cut. It usually plays on IFC. It can play on IFC from time to time. It's obviously the original cut was on VHS and the rather rare Laserdisc release for it, I believe. So there it is, Cruising. Very controversial film. A very kind of scary film, more in league, as I said, with Friedkin's The Exorcist than any kind of his procedural police dramas. But still, a very rewarding film, a good film, and a movie to really freak people out with, because it's this, it's this mainstream-looking film. It's got Paul Sorvino and Karen Allen and Al Pacino in it, so you pull your DVD off the shelf and like, hey, let's watch Cruising, and everybody's going like, oh, okay, Cruising, and then and then so it's Al Pacino, and then people usually get to the Powers Booth scene where this hanky means you give a blowjob. This hanky means you want to get a blowjob. This in your water sports, and they're like, this is an Al Pacino film. This is supposed to be a safe movie, so it is a good movie to freak people out with. Probably more probably the coolest cult movie to freak people out with, because it's like Al Pacino's the gateway into he's Scarface and he's in this gay leather scene, so it's. It's a good gateway to freak people out. So Cruising, a gateway drug, a good thing to kind of freak people out and make them have a bad cult movie trip. So there you go. That's my endorsement.
Hey, baby, what's happening?
I'm with someone.
Aren't we all? Want to dance?